From the Vedic perspective, there has never been any conflict between the external science and the world within. They say, Dve vidye veditavye parachaiva paracha tatra para rigvedo yajurvedah samaved atharvangiras itihas puranah shiksha kalpo vyakaranam niruktam chando jyotishamiti. They say there are two kinds of technologies. One technology related to the phenomenal world outside, and one technology related to your own internal world. Both these are essential parts of the human experience. There is no need to deny or contradict them. And they also say that if somebody neglects the inner technology, that person will attain darkness. However, if the spiritual technologist neglects the external technology, he will attain a greater darkness. So you need to utilize both these, synthesize these to reach that final goal. So this spiritual technology, just as the material technology has by and large been the monopoly of the Western world. Since the days of the Greek civilization, the Western world has focused on the external world, understanding it and developing technologies to harness it. The Eastern Hemisphere has inclined towards the inner technology. And there have been one after the other innumerable great such sages, spiritual technologists, who made this the focus of their study, experiment, and practice. And they came out with such tremendous realizations that are very powerful tools for all of us for achieving that fulfillment, satisfaction, and happiness that we all seek, but we cannot get merely through physical sciences. So what is that inner technology? That is what we would like to understand. This inner world has got various segments. To keep the discussion simple, there is the mind and there is the intellect. By the mind, I do not mean the brain. The brain is the hardware. However, the mind is something subtle. Science is probing in to understand the distinction between the brain and the mind. The picture yet is not very clear. These spiritual scientists, the inner technologists, tell us that the mind is a subtle machine inside us that is constantly generating thoughts, creating desires. And the intellect is the faculty of discrimination that's fitted into the system. So the intellect makes decisions and the mind creates desires. In this system, the intellect has the ability to control the mind. Although it does not seem so, you often feel that my mind is not under control. You do tend to feel this because you wish to focus it somewhere and the mind is running elsewhere. However, that is not so. All of us have this ability that if our intellect could firmly decide, the mind would immediately come under focus. Like, for example, do people like working in their office? Very rarely. Most people do it because they have to. That is why Friday evening is one of the best times of the week. There's a feeling of euphoria and liberation. Weekend is coming. And Monday morning is a time for depression. I asked somebody in America on Monday morning, how are you? He said, what, how are you, Swamiji? Today is Monday morning. In other words, people do not like to work. And yet, everybody sits there in their office and applies themselves to their work for the duration of the working hours from 8 to 5 or whatever it is. How did that mind come under control? Because the intellect decided this is necessary. If I do not do it, I will lose my job. And in these days of recession, there are not many alternative jobs in the market. So if you want to feed yourself and the family, you better do this. When the intellect decided the absolute necessity of it, the mind came under focus. You are doing this throughout the day. Your mind says, at 8 o'clock in the night, I would like to see that TV serial that's coming. The intellect says, tomorrow is your final exam, you better sit and study. So the intellect controls the mind, and you sit and study. The fact that you have made it, the students, to the MIT, is an indication of the extent to which you have exercised the power of the intellect over the mind, to dedicate yourself to your studies and excel in them. But the fact is, every student does this. Parents come to me, Swamiji, please explain something to my child. He doesn't apply his mind to studies. He keeps playing all day long. He's your child, why don't you explain to him? He doesn't listen to me. All right, my son, why don't you focus on your studies? Swamiji, I don't like it. Mine doesn't remain there. That is the nature of his mind. And the same student, when he sits in the examination hall to answer the question paper, for 3 hours he brings his mind into complete focus. He doesn't even look at the neighbors or peep out of the window. After 3 hours, the examiner has to pull the paper away. It's time up, please give it. Look at the amount of concentration that the student developed. How did this happen when his mind was so unfocused? That was the power of the intellect. The discrimination of the intellect realized that these 3 hours are of vital importance. Now, Mr. Mind, if you fool around, it will not work. You will have to repeat the year. So when the intellect decided this is important, the mind came into focus. That kind of focus, if he had maintained throughout the year, he or she would have topped the school. But throughout the year, the intellect said, studies is important, but not for me, for my parents. For me, football is more important. When the decision of the intellect was otherwise, there was no question of controlling the mind. So you see the power that the intellect holds over the mind. Now that power is not being utilized in our daily lives. To utilize that power, we need a little bit of knowledge.